In the first part of this 3-episode series, we touched on the fact that misinformation has been around for a long time, and that it may seem like a recent problem because the internet has forever changed the way we share information. Since the internet and social media are probably here to stay, the best thing we can do about information, and therefore misinformation, is to understand how we receive it and how best to deliver it. That's the topic of this week's Healthcare Triage. The way that misinformation is processed and the ability to change minds with evidence-based information has a lot to do with, unsurprisingly, the brain. And while we're still working to understand a lot of things about the brain, we do know a little about how it works in this realm. The parts of our brain that process more complex information are newer structures, and some of the brain structures that preceded them do a lot of emotional processing and have a mighty influence on our behavior. This makes sense, because those brain structures were ostensibly responsible for quick life or death decisions, not tasks that required careful reasoning. This is terrible for dealing with high emotion, novel information, perhaps the two best descriptors of misinformation. We know that people are much more likely to share novel, striking information. And we also know that reward pathways in the brain are activated by new and striking stimuli and by sharing information with others. There's a lot of cool fledgling research on the brain and misinformation. Covering all that would require that we give it an episode of its own, and maybe someday we will, but for this episode we want to focus on the best ways to deliver information. And while we're mainly interested in this for communicating about public health, it probably applies to a lot of topics. For a long time, communicators of science and public health stuck to the information deficit model, which holds that people's beliefs about things like scientific issues can be changed simply by providing them with evidence-based information. This is also called the one-way expert model of science communication, and it definitely isn't great at changing hearts and minds. But what else can we do? To start, the historical one-way model of communication is better off morphing into a two-way dialogue. This can only be successful when people's culture and experiences are given weight in the conversation, and when mutual learning takes place as opposed to one person trying to teach the other. But if the role of the expert is not to just deliver the information, what exactly are they supposed to do and how? One 2020 paper poses 3 responsibilities for the expert: share input that is well received by others, listen to and learn from other people's input, and invest in relationships with said people. These responsibilities involve addressing questions or concerns that aren't directly related to our own area of expertise. For example, discussing economic or political implications related to a field of study, and even raising these questions or concerns ourselves in a way that helps guide the discussion. It's also critical to display respect in these conversations, genuinely listening to and being open to the experiences and thoughts of other people, validating their concerns. Empathy matters. We can't walk a path with someone if we don't first meet them where they're at. The goal should not be to change someone's mind or reach an agreement, but to connect with people, learn from their perspective, and to present information in a way that takes their values and history into account. It's got to be a no-judgment zone, and one in which the non-expert isn't seen as less valuable in the conversation. It's also really important to communicate things like scientific uncertainty. Back in 2022, we did a podcast episode on science communication, and one of our guests, Dr. Krista Hoffman-Longton, had similar things to say. She stressed the importance of relationships, as well as remembering that we as humans have incredibly complex emotions and histories that influence how we behave in response to certain information. Something else we covered in that podcast episode is the illusion of explanatory depth. The best way to describe this is with an example: the humble toilet. We all know about toilets. We probably feel like we have some pretty decent knowledge about toilets. Is it just me, or is the word toilet starting to sound weird? But if someone asked us to explain all the specifics of how a toilet worked, would we be able to do it? There are certainly a number of people that could, but it's likely that the majority of us would struggle to actually sit down and draw a diagram of how the thing actually works. Why does this matter? Because we might be able to use it to our advantage when guiding an important conversation. Say, for example, someone insists that certain vaccines change your DNA. Rather than telling the person that this is simply untrue, which, by the way, is known to actually reinforce their opinion, you could ask them to explain how it does so. This may lead them to the realization that they aren't sure and can open up opportunities to share important information to fill the gaps. This, of course, only works if you've cultivated a sincere and respectful dialogue, and if you're listening and asking genuine questions. Asking such a question, with any kind of disdain or judgment is likely to lead to your conversation partner digging in their heels and effectively ending the chance for a productive conversation. These are just some of the basics. There is so much more cool information about this, and we wish we could make this episode twice as long, though we'd probably be better off having a genuine dialogue with you. But since that isn't possible, we hope you'll join us next week for the third and final installment of this important series. Hey, did you enjoy this video? You might enjoy the first of these in a series on the history of misinformation. We'd appreciate it if you'd like the video. Subscribe to the channel right down below, and maybe go on over to patreon.com/healthcaretriage, where you can help support the show and make it bigger and better. We'd like to especially thank our research associates, Joe Sevitz and Edward Lillaholm, and of course, our Surgeon Admiral, Sam.